Hi everyone, I'm Celeste and welcome to my YouTube channel. My YouTube channel is all about cosplay, and today is another one of those crazy costumes that I've been wanting to make for a long time. It may not be very difficult, but I just never made it until now. Mainly because it's a summer cosplay, and summer in Copenhagen is very short. And I just was losing out on a lot of time, so I decided to cosplay as Mai Shiranui in her cow bikini from SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy. Now, I own SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy. It is so much fun to play, but it is like the weirdest fighting game that I've ever owned, and that's saying a lot considering Puzzle Fighter is a very interesting fighting game, but it's a puzzle game. This one felt like a button mashing version of King of Fighters, and the only way to win is by using a special attack at the end. And I mean like an ultra special, super finisher combo kind of special. The outfits in this game are extremely cute, and I love my girl Mai Shiranui. Mai Shiranui has been my favorite character from SNK franchises all the time. So another King of Fighters, Mai better be in it, and that way I'll main as her. So I'm making Mai Shiranui's cow bikini, and it was actually really easy to make. I've made it within almost a day. So I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial. If you're new to my channel, I've been cosplaying since 2005. I've used various techniques such as sewing, crocheting, knitting, wig styling, makeup, now 3D printing in my cosplays. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down below, and while you're there, hit that red button to subscribe to never miss out on any future cosplay content or sewing things that I do. Alright, so you know what time it is. It's tutorial time! Hey! Mai Shiranui actually has white fans with brown wood, so I got these fans at a local Chinese store, and I'm going to be painting the design white. So I'm just using basic acrylic white paint and a nice flat brush to go all over the design, giving it a nice coat. Now, if you do have spray paint, feel free to do that, but make sure that you mask off the brown wood first so you don't ruin the wood finish. Make sure to evenly coat both sides, that way none of the design comes through. With my 3D printer, I printed out these bull horns. I'm going to go ahead and paint them black with black acrylic. Nothing fancy, I'm just turning them black. Originally, I thought I was going to add a little bit of silver paint to give it a little bit more texture, but I actually ended up hating this, and I took off all of the silver paint. It just gave it a different look than what I wanted, and it didn't make it look organic, so I just stuck to black paint. While everything is drying, I went ahead and busted out this white yarn. Now, I've had this yarn for quite some time, and I thought, wow, it'd be awesome for me to make my own rope for this bikini. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out a small circle from some cardboard. In the center of the circle, poke a hole into it, then cut 8 notches. Now cut 7 extremely long pieces of yarn. You don't actually know how much you're going to need because when you braid the yarn, it's going to get a lot smaller. So cut 7 really long pieces. After getting your 7 strings, create a knot. This is just one knot at the end, and then a few inches down the way, create a second knot. You're probably wondering, why are you doing this? That's because if you want to keep it all super similar in length, you can start from there and cut off from the edge and not worry about it. It's a little bit redundant, but it's okay because later we're going to be adding a bead to the end, so you want that extra space. Now separate your strings throughout the loom, making sure each notch has 1 piece of string. In order to start weaving, you want to take your 3rd string from the right and bring it to the empty notch. So count 2 strings, and the 3rd one, go ahead and put in the empty notch. Keep doing this for the entire length of your rope. Now, if you don't actually want to make your own rope, like me being super weird and hardcore, go ahead and go buy your own rope and start from there. You can definitely buy your own rope, but I decided to make my own because I have the tools necessary and I already had this white yarn and I didn't want it to go to waste. Now, if you are going to make your own yarn like me, go ahead and finish it to the end and then tie it off in a knot. You can actually see here that my strings definitely did not end up even after all of that. So it's okay if your strings aren't even at the beginning, but make sure that you have enough for the length of your entire bikini and a little bit extra for your fans. I just wanted to show you, this is how much yarn I used. I didn't measure it properly, but it was so much and it only yielded this much. I'm so shocked at how much time I had on my hands watching shows and just hanging out and watching people play video games on Twitch to see how long of a string that I needed to yield the amount that I needed for my bikini. Luckily, at the end of this project, I did use up every single piece of this, so I didn't run out of string at all, and I'm very happy with my progress. So it's definitely about 1/4 amount of string goes into making the rope. For Mai Shiranui's cow bikini, I got this wonderful faux cow fur at Bedste Stoffer here in Denmark, and I only needed 1/2 meter of it. 1/2 meter seems a little bit gratuitous, but I didn't want to cut away any of the amount of the fabric because I don't know how much I need to cover my butt. For the bottom part of my bikini, I took a pair of one of my bikini bottoms and I traced it out onto my fabric. And then I went ahead and used my rotary cutter to cut out my bikini bottoms. So now I'm just grabbing a bikini top and tracing it out onto my fabric. So what I'm going to do is actually line up my bikini top around some of the larger scraps of material as opposed to cutting fresh on a bigger piece. This is because I want to maximize all potential of the fabric rather than wasting it. After tracing it out, I'm going to go ahead and cut out my bikini top piece. I modified my bikini top to gather in the center as opposed to just being its own standalone piece. If you look at the reference, you'll notice that it comes together and not showing any of the cord in the center of the bikini top. Now with my bikini, I want to make sure that there's a lining so nothing gets soaked and inappropriate things show. I'm going to be using this black spandex fabric, and I'm going to use my already cut pieces as my templates. So I'm going to go ahead and pin them down and then cut them out. I'll use one piece of rope for the back of the bikini bottom, and I'll use one piece of rope for the front of the bikini bottom. I'll tie them together at the sides, so first I'll create a bow, seeing how much I'll need for each side. I'll have an approximate measurement, so I'll cut the rope twice for each piece of the bottom. Mai Shiranui's bikini top has a tie at the neck and a tie at the bust line. I don't need these to be very long ties, so I wrapped the rope around my body once, created a bow, and then cut it. I created another bow in the rope and then made it go around my neck like the halter and cut it there. The rest of the rope is going to be for the fans. If I don't have enough rope for the fans, I can always make some more using the loom technique. Before I proceed any further with my rope, I want to make sure I tie off the ends so it doesn't fray too much. Before I begin sewing, I bought these beads for the bikini bottoms and the fans. So I'm going to paint 4 of these red for the bikini bottoms. Beads are a little bit tricky to paint, so luckily I have this bamboo skewer to help me paint them red. So I'm just going to pierce them with the skewer and paint them red with acrylic paint. Now that I'm done with the red paint for the beads, I'm going to use the red paint for my workout gloves. These gloves I got at my local pharmacy like CVS, and I'm going to go ahead and paint the pink parts red. I actually like the black and gray details because they look like a fighter would wear that, so I'm going to keep all of that the same color and carefully paint the pink parts red while wearing them, because it didn't seem right for me to not wear them, so it's stretched out. The red really does pop really nicely against the pink, and I know right now it doesn't look like much, but it looks so much better. So I highly recommend just doing it this way as opposed to making gloves on your own. I know you all were curious, and this is what my hands look like after I take the gloves off. Because I have 2 fans, I want to make sure that I paint 2 of the beads blue. I have this really nice cobalt blue, so I'll be using that to paint my beads. While everything is drying, I'm going to begin with the sewing. You can see that I sewed together the bikini top already with the lining together on the sides. Using a safety pin, I attach it to the rope and bring it through the top of the bikini and sew that closed. I do this for the other side as well. For the bottom of the cord, we are going to sew it to the lining and then sew the lining to the front piece, but make sure to leave the edge open so you can flip it inside out. Once you have flipped your piece inside out, what we're going to do is tuck in any of the pieces that are exposed, like the raw edges. Then we're going to go around the entire perimeter and top stitch it down. Make sure to do this for both sides. This is currently how the bikini top looks with the backs tied. This top tie was a little bit too long, so I'm going to have to cut it and make it shorter, and then I can use the rest of this for the other fan. This one is just fine. I think I'll let it fray a little bit higher. Now all I have to do is combine the center piece of the bikini with the gold piece of fabric. Luckily, I'm a scrap hoarder, and I have this scrap lame left over from other KDA cosplays. I'm going to cut off this little rectangle at the side, and then I'm going to fold it over onto itself and sew it together. Then I flip it inside out to reveal the beautiful goldness that it is. I'm going to go ahead and sew together the middle of the bikini just to make sure it doesn't move around when I'm sewing the gold piece to it. Using a needle and thread, I sew the gold tube to the front. I overlap the gold tube onto itself in the back to secure it together. I do some whip stitches on the sides to make sure it doesn't slide out of place. I take extra care to make sure I don't sew through all of the layers and expose the thread on the front. When I'm done, I make a knot and cut off the excess. With the top being done, we're going to go ahead and sew the sides of the bikini bottom. I made sure to only do the sides so I can flip this inside out properly. Before I completely sew off the bikini bottoms, I need to make sure that my strings are perfect and ready. So on each bikini bottom string, I'm going to add 2 beads, one on each end. I took a small piece of wire and folded it in half. I put half of that into the bead, and the loop part, I put the rope inside. I pulled the wire really hard through the bead and it dragged the rope in. Ta-da! Now the bead is on the rope. I created a knot leaving some tassel hanging and then a knot after the bead to keep it in place. I made sure to do this on both pieces of rope on both ends. This cow bikini reminds me of having kind of like a drawstring effect at the bottom because it has a little bit of gathers. So what I want to do is go ahead and sew the 2 pieces together invertedly so it encases the string first. This is why I put the beads on first as opposed to later, because I didn't want to have to deal with it when sewing this piece together. So make sure you invert this a little bit so you sew the casing together on the wrong sides, then you can flip it back out on the other side. This is actually really difficult to handle when you sewed everything together and then try to put in your string, but find out what works for you. Make sure not to sew your rope while sewing this together. It's going to feel a little bit strange, but just go ahead and sew down this top part invertedly, and then you just flip it on top of it back on the rope, and then you'll get this nice seam encasing the rope inside the bikini bottom. Once I get that entire side finished, I flip it inside out, and then I top stitch it, making sure that I encase the string. Don't sew over the string, just encase it so it can still slide through. Make sure to do this on both sides. You want the bikini bottom string to slide in and out, but you don't really want that to happen. That's why we already added the beads. I wanted to check in on my fans and see how they're looking. Turns out they're dry. So I'm going to use a knife to score the area around the wood and the screw. I'm using contact glue to attach some of the rope I made, but first I'm going to tie a knot in the rope. I carefully press the knot into the glue for a few seconds to hold it in place. I check on the blue beads and turns out they're dry too. So I do that same technique using some wire and pulling the rope through to get the bead on the rope. Once I do that, I create 2 knots once again, one at the bottom of the bead and the top of the bead. I make sure to leave a lot of space at the edges so I can have some fraying on the cording. Just repeat this on the other fan and your fans are done. Alright, sorry about that minor detour. Now we're going to create that tail. I'm going to be using some galvanized wire and I'm going to stretch it out and create this little loop thing that has a very nice backing. I don't want my butt to be really saggy with the heaviness of the wire, so I only looped it once and added 1 supporting wire on it. Now your tail can be as long as you want and as much fabric as you want, but I wanted mine to be kind of accurate and not longer than my kneecaps. Taking out my bikini bottom, I make sure that my wire loop isn't bigger than my butt. If you're following this tutorial, you'll have to fit yourself accordingly. I want to find a spot that isn't too low and isn't too high. So I chose somewhere in the top region in the middle. I'm going to mark that spot with a pin and then cut the cow fabric only open with the seam ripper. I feel like I have more control if I use a seam ripper as opposed to scissors. I make a small slit first, and then if I need to, I'll widen it. You don't want this to be loose, you want this to be pretty tight. So only make it as big as you need to. Now taking your loop, go ahead and slowly insert it into your cow fabric hole. Your long wire piece should be outside of the hole and looking kind of funny like a thin tail. If you want, you can anchor down the loop inside by making a few whip stitches around it on the lining fabric. Now you want to measure out the length of this wire, and this is going to be the length of your full tail. You want to make sure that you have an extra little bit of seam allowance so you can sew it onto the bikini and you don't run short. Using that measurement, we're going to take it to the cow fabric and cut it out. I'm going to cut mine slightly on the bias because I don't want to waste any of this fabric. Also, it's just going to be a straight tail. It's not going to bend too much and I don't really need it to stretch, not like this fabric can, but I'm going to cut about 3 inches out of this material. My final tail design has a wider top than bottom. It's like an elongated trapezoid. So the bottom is going to be pretty small and I cut it out this way. Take this piece to the sewing machine with the right sides together, creating another tube. Once you're done sewing that together, flip it inside out. I also have this black yarn just hanging around my house, so I'm going to be using it into this cosplay by creating it into the tail. I'm going to be cutting several strands to create the hair at the end. In fact, it's better for the tail to have various lengths so it looks more natural, but we'll get to that part in a second. After cutting several strands of yarn, you want to fold it in half to double the thickness. Using a needle and thread, we are going to secure it all together so it doesn't fall out. I first wrap the center of the yarn bundle several times to secure it in place, and then I sew it together with several knots. You'll probably notice that this is very similar to my tassel video. It is, but we aren't going to loop it in the center at the top because we don't want it to become a tassel. Right now it's starting to look a lot like a bunch of yarn created into a tassel, so I'm using this distressing kit to be able to change the yarn to look more hair-like. What I'm going to do is take this wire brush and just start brushing out the yarn as hard and as fast as possible, slowly cleaning my brush every once in a while. This is actually going to create the fibers to be pulled out and look more like hair rather than yarn. With enough patience and wax on, wax off abilities, ta-da, this is what our tail should look like now. We're going to sew that tail to the bottom of the fabric tail, and that would complete majority of our tail. But no, not yet. We had to slip it onto our bikini bottom so it will become a full cow body tail. Woo! So go ahead and slip that fabric tube onto the wire that's on your bikini bottom. Now if you have a lot of excess fabric, you can tuck that inside the tube or fold it over. You just want to make sure that you close that opening and make sure that the wire is secure and safe inside the tube. I ended up doing several whip stitches around. I didn't want to use regular stitches. It didn't make sense for me to do that. So whip stitching via go-go all around the bikini bottom and the tail, combining them into one. And when I was happy with how secure it was, I went ahead and knotted it off and cut it off the excess string. And that will finish your tail. And that means that your entire bikini bottoms are now done. Next up is the headband. The headband is a little bit funny looking and I really didn't understand what it is, but I tried my best and I created kind of like this ear muff kind of covering. So what I did do was I took out my dried horns and I used that as a template for how big and wide the top part should be. I did a general draft of the idea of my headband was going to be, and I wanted to see how it would look. Obviously, this is not going to be my final design, but luckily I have plenty of fabric left over in case I mess up. My overall fit and design had a really thin middle, and then the sides were really big, almost looking like bunny ears, but this is actually the full size of the headband, and in the center we're going to attach it with elastic so it can stretch around my head. The reason why it actually gets thin in the middle is because that's going to be at the nape and it doesn't need to be so wide. What I'm doing here is actually using the same cow fabric as my lining piece. I decided to do this because I wanted the cow fabric to be seen on both sides when I'm wearing it. Take these pieces to the sewing machine and sew all around the perimeter, leaving an opening so you can flip it inside out. Before you flip it inside out, you want to clip the curves, and this way it'll lay flat and have enough stretch and not bunch up. Like I said earlier, I'm going to be adding elastic into this headband. I did this at the top of the curves. I made sure to seam rip it open and then sew it together. Now taking the horns, I'm just going to find the position where I want them, and then I'm going to go grab my contact glue and I'm just going to glue the entire bottom of the horn onto the headband. Because the headband is so tight around my head, and I mean it's comfortable around my head, I'm just going to go ahead and stick it on there, and I'm not going to have a problem with it shifting anywhere. As long as people don't get too close, I won't stab them with my horns. Luckily, I still have tons of fabric left over, and what's this? I already started making my ears. So I'm going to have my ears a little bit bigger, and then I'm going to replicate making them like the Eevee tutorial. If you guys haven't checked out my Eevee cosplay, please do that so you can see how I make the ears. So I have this beautiful pink vinyl fabric, but the downfall with it is it's not withstood the test of time, and you've probably seen this fabric on my review reviewing old cosplays video, but this is the same fabric I used for my Mari Illustrious Mikanami from Evangelion You Cannot Redo. So I'm just going to use this as my skin fabric inside my ears. It does crinkle and have a little bit of problems, but I think that'll give a little bit more dimension as opposed to it being flat vinyl. After I finished making my ears, I just hand sewed them onto the headband, and that was that. My last piece for this cosplay that I know of is the necklace, and the necklace is actually a bright red choker with a cowbell on it. Who says you don't need more cowbell? What I did was I used red vinyl and I turned it into a tube the same length of my neck, and then I added snaps to keep it closed. Ta-da! Nice 3 red snaps. I 3D printed a cowbell and then I painted it gold. I still had one more bead left from that pack from earlier, so I'll use this for that bell ringing part. I cut a little bit of gold wire and threaded the bead onto it. Then I twisted the wire closed to make sure the bead didn't go anywhere. Good thing I'm a hoarder because I have a gold zipper pull that will work as attaching the cowbell to the choker. So I'm just going to attach this bead part with the wire using more wire, ironically. Then I'm going to feed the top of the zipper pull through the cowbell. To attach the cowbell, I'm going to find the center point in my choker and then sew it on using red thread. In a last-minute decision, I decided to make little footsies, so I created a pattern for my foot using leftover fabric and the cow fabric and some snaps. I created little socks. And that concludes my Mai Shiranui tutorial video and my showcase of it. I was lucky enough to actually shoot some video with my friend Jakob. He also runs a cosplay channel on YouTube, so if you guys can check him out down below, that'd be awesome, and check out all of his other content that he features, such as other cosplayers and not just me. And that'd be super cool. If you have any questions, like I said earlier, make sure to leave them in a comment down below. Hit me up on my social media channels such as Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook, here as well. I also have a TikTok. I try to post daily. I don't know. It's really hard to do all these things, but feel free to leave me messages or feedback or anything, and I will see you guys later. So remember to stay inspired, be creative, and I will see you in a future video. Bye!